Welcome, sleepy travelers. Tonight we journey through the desert world of Arrakis, where the spice melange flows and ancient tales await. Join us as we explore the wonders of Dune and let these stories carry you gently towards sleep. After our story ends, you'll hear the peaceful sounds of crackling fire to help you drift into deep sleep. There will be no advertisements or interruptions, just continuous, calming sounds to accompany your rest. Now, let's begin our journey across the sands of Dune. Deep within the old imperial palace on Seleucus Secundus lies a sealed chamber untouched for generations. The Mirror Room, they call it. Built in an age when emperors commanded the stars and the fearsome Sardaukar warriors were forged in discipline and pain. As you drift towards sleep, imagine yourself floating gently down through layers of consciousness until you find yourself standing before a massive circular door carved from stone that seems to drink in light rather than reflect it. The door opens without sound, and cold air brushes against your skin as you step into a perfect circle of a room. Your footsteps echo strangely, as if returning from vast distances. The walls, floor, and ceiling are lined entirely with mirrors, not the pristine reflective surfaces you might expect, but ancient glass warped by time and the weight of countless gazes. The mirrors curve slightly, creating the unsettling sensation that you stand at the center of a sphere rather than a circle. Torchlight flickers without flame, casting impossible shadows that move independently of your own. The air hums with something like memory, a vibration just below hearing that seems to speak directly to your bones. And as you turn slowly, you notice that the reflections surrounding you are not identical. Each mirror holds a slightly different version of yourself. "Welcome, initiate," whispers a voice from everywhere and nowhere. "Welcome to the truth of yourself." One reflection shows you garbed in the grey uniform of a Sardaukar commander, face stern with the weight of countless battles. Another reveals a younger version, eyes wide with fear during training. In yet another you appear older, bearing scars you do not recognize. "Which one is real?" you ask the room. The mirrors answer in chorus, each reflection's lips moving with subtle differences. "All of us. None of us. Time is the great illusion." You approach one particular mirror where your reflection wears the distinctive uniform of an elite Sardaukar commander. The glass surface ripples like water as you near it, and suddenly you are pulled forward, not physically, but as if your consciousness is being drawn through the mirror. The cold hardness of the glass gives way to the sensation of falling, and then you stand on a battlefield. The sky above is the color of dried blood, and the ground beneath your boots is littered with the fallen. You feel the weight of a uniform you've never worn, the muscle memory of combat training you've never experienced. Your body feels different, stronger, harder, emptied of something essential yet filled with lethal purpose. "Commander," a voice says, and you turn to find a lieutenant awaiting orders. "The prisoners from House Atreides are secured. What are your commands?" Words form on your lips without conscious thought. Separate the engineers, execute the rest. Your voice holds no emotion, as if speaking of disposing of broken equipment rather than human lives. The lieutenant salutes and departs. You look down at your hands that have killed more times than you can count, and wonder whose memories these are. Are they truly yours in some forgotten life? Or are you experiencing the echoes of a Sardaukar whose consciousness once stood in the same mirror chamber? The scene shifts, dissolving like mist, and you find yourself back in the mirror room, but something has changed. The reflections have multiplied, stretching into infinity, each showing a different moment, a different choice. Time is circular here, comes a harsh voice, and you turn to see the spectral figure of an instructor, a tall, gaunt man whose presence you feel more than see. He paces the chamber's perimeter, hands clasped behind his back. The Emperor Sardaukar must learn to exist outside of self, to kill without hatred, to die without fear, to obey without question. The instructor passes between you and one of the mirrors, yet casts no reflection. The mirrors show what was and what might be. Look too long, and you forget which is which. As if responding to his words, the mirrors begin to whisper, each reflection speaking in a different voice. Some plead for mercy, others laugh with cruel triumph. Some weep silently, tears tracking down faces that might be yours. I don't belong here, you tell the instructor. No one belongs here, he responds. That is the point. In this room, identity dissolves. What remains is pure function, pure obedience. You turn away, trying to find the door through which you entered, but it has vanished. The more you resist the visions, the more insistent they become, pulling at your attention like undertow. Stop fighting, the instructor says. Surrender to it. That is how you become Sardaukar. One mirror draws your gaze, smaller than the others, set low near the floor. In it you see not an adult reflection, but a child. Your younger self stares back with solemn eyes that seem to hold questions spanning centuries. Is this who we became? The child asks, voice clear despite the distance. You kneel before this reflection, reaching out a hand that the child mirrors. Your fingertips touch the glass simultaneously. I don't know, you answer truthfully. I'm still trying to understand. The child smiles sadly. We were someone before they made us nothing. Remember that. The glass beneath your fingers turns to liquid, rippling outward from the point of contact. The ripples spread to the other mirrors, distorting the reflections until they blur together in a kaleidoscope of memories, lives, and possibilities. You close your eyes against the dizzying sight, and when you open them again, you find yourself in open air atop one of Salusa Secundus's barren mesas. The mirror room is gone, yet something of its essence remains with you, a sense of identity both fragmented and expanded. Below you stretches the harsh training grounds where generations of Sardaukar were forged. In the distance, the ruins of what was once the imperial capital rise like the skeleton of some massive beast. This place was the heart of the empire before the fall, before the seat of power moved to Kaitain. Now it serves as both prison planet and the secret crucible for the Emperor's most feared warriors. The wind carries whispers of those who died here, not just in battle, but in the breaking and remaking that the Sardaukar training demanded. You wonder how many stood in that mirror room before you, losing themselves piece by piece until nothing remained but perfect, hollow obedience. The weak don't survive here, comes a voice, and you turn to see an old man in tattered Sardaukar uniform, his face weathered beyond recognition. But sometimes I wonder if the strong truly survive either. We become something else entirely. Who are you, you ask? The old soldier shrugs. Names were the first thing they took from us. I've been dead so long I sometimes forget I once lived. He gestures toward the horizon. Even the planet remembers what it once was. Green fields, blue skies, the jewel of the Imperium. Now it's just sand and rock and blood. And memories, you add. Yes, he agrees. The memories linger longest of all. As if summoned by your words, the landscape before you shimmers, the barren wasteland briefly overlaid with an image of verdant gardens and gleaming spires, Salusa Secundus as it once was, before the devastation that transformed it into a hell world. The vision lasts only moments before fading back to harsh reality. The planet dreams of what it was, the old soldier says, just as we all do. You look out over the bleak landscape that forged the Emperor's deadliest warriors and feel the weight of all the lives lived and lost here. The echo of screams from the training grounds, the silent suffering of prisoners, the hollow victories of those who survived only by surrendering their humanity. What happens now, you ask the old soldier, but when you turn he is gone, if he was ever there at all. Only the wind answers, carrying dust and whispers across the mesa. The light changes subtly, the already blood-red sun darkening toward dusk. As shadows lengthen across the rocky ground, you sense the landscape shifting again, not in physical form, but in something more profound. The veil between present and past, between reality and memory, grows thin. In the gathering darkness, you begin to see figures moving across the training grounds below. Ghostly Sardaukar engaged in brutal combat exercises. Their movements are precise, lethal, executed with machine-like perfection. You cannot hear the commands being shouted, but you see the synchronized response, hundreds moving as one perfect weapon. Among them, one figure stands apart, a commander watching the drills with hands clasped behind his back. Even from this distance, something about his posture seems familiar. With certainty that defies logic, you know it is the same commander whose memories you briefly shared in the mirror room. The scene below fades as night claims the landscape, stars emerging in a sky unmarred by light pollution. In the profound darkness of Salusa Secundus's night, the stars seem close enough to touch, ancient light reaching across vast distances, much like the memories that echo through time in this haunted place. You lie back on the cool stone of the mesa, gazing up at those infinite points of light. Each star represents worlds with their own histories, their own rise and fall of civilizations, their own memories. The universe is vast beyond comprehension, yet patterns repeat across time and space. Ambition, conflict, destruction, rebirth. The cycle continues without end. As you contemplate this cosmic perspective, you feel yourself growing lighter, as if the boundary between your body and the night air is dissolving. The hard stone beneath you seems to soften, and the stars above begin to blur and shift. You are falling again, or perhaps rising, through layers of consciousness, through the membrane that separates one reality from another. The sensation is not frightening, but peaceful, a surrender to forces beyond your control. When the movement ceases, you find yourself in a new place entirely, a cavernous underground chamber carved from living rock. The air here is different from Salusa Secundus, warmer, drier, carrying the faint tang of spice. Without being told, you know you have traveled to Arrakis, the desert planet, Dune. The chamber is vast, its ceiling lost in shadows. Massive stone pillars rise like ancient trees, their surfaces covered in intricate carvings that tell stories you cannot quite decipher. The floor beneath your feet is smooth sandstone, worn by countless footsteps over millennia. At the center of the chamber stands a curious structure, A ring of weathered stone markers surrounding a depression in the floor, filled with sand as fine as powder. The sand glimmers faintly in the low light, suggesting it contains traces of melange, the precious spice of Arrakis. "This is the chamber of ancestral memory," comes a voice, and you turn to see a woman in a Fremen stillsuit, her blue within blue eyes regarding you with ancient wisdom. Few outsiders have seen this place. "What is its purpose?" you ask. "To remember," she says simply. "The water of a person's life, their experiences, their knowledge, their essence, does not truly disappear with death. It joins the tribal consciousness. Here, we can sometimes access those waters." You approach the ring of stones cautiously. "Like the mirror room on Seleucus Secundus?" The Fremen woman tilts her head. "Similar, perhaps, but different in crucial ways. The mirror's forced fragmentation, dissolution of self. This place allows communion with those who came before while maintaining one's own identity." She gestures to the sand circle. "Sit, if you wish to understand." After a moment's hesitation, you step over the stone markers and lower yourself to sit cross-legged in the spice-infused sand. The Fremen woman remains outside the circle, watching with impassive eyes. "Close your eyes," she instructs. "Breathe deeply. Feel the spice enter your lungs, your blood, your mind." You do as she says, drawing deep breaths of the dry, cinnamon-scented air. At first, nothing happens beyond a slight lightheadedness. Then, gradually, you become aware of a presence, not physical but unmistakable, of countless others surrounding you. Whispers begin at the edge of hearing, too faint to distinguish individual words, yet conveying meaning nonetheless. These are the ancestors of Arrakis, Fremen who lived and died on this harsh world, their memories preserved in the collective consciousness of their people. Unlike the fragmented reflections in the mirror room, these presences feel whole, distinct yet connected to one another, in an intricate network of shared experience. One voice gradually strengthens above the others, and a figure coalesces in your mind's eye. A Fremen man, face weathered by sun and wind, eyes showing the total blue of deep spice addiction. "I am Caliph," the presence identifies itself. "I lived 10 generations ago, during the time of the great drought. I died, so my water might save my siege." Images flow into your mind, a younger Caliph walking the deep desert, mapping hidden water caches. Caliph teaching children to read wind patterns in sand ripples. Caliph's final days, as water rations dwindled to nothing, his deliberate choice to walk into the desert so others might live. Your sacrifice is remembered, you find yourself saying, though you had no intention to speak. "As all true sacrifices are," Caliph responds. "This is the way of water. It flows from vessel to vessel but is never truly lost." His presence recedes, and another emerges. A woman warrior who fought the Harkonnens a century ago, then a planetologist who first dreamed of transforming Arrakis into a green world, then a water counter whose precise measurements saved thousands during a siege. One by one, they share glimpses of their lives, contributions both humble and profound to the survival and culture of the Fremen. Unlike the disorienting experience in the mirror room, each encounter leaves you feeling more whole rather than less, as if these accumulated wisdoms are strengthening rather than fragmenting your sense of self. You begin to understand something profound about memory and identity, that true strength comes not from isolation but from connection, not from erasing the past but from incorporating it consciously into the present. Hours or perhaps minutes pass. Time seems fluid in this state of communion, until the voices gradually fade and you become aware once more of the chamber around you. The Fremen woman still stands at the edge of the circle, patient as the desert itself. "You begin to understand," she says, not a question but a statement. "I think so," you reply, rising slowly from the sand. Your body feels different somehow, not physically changed, but inhabited differently, as if you have expanded to accommodate new awareness. The Sardaukar were made hollow to be filled with purpose. The Fremen remain full, carrying their ancestors within them. She nods once, a gesture of confirmation. Different paths, different strengths. The universe requires both destruction and preservation to maintain balance. And which will prevail in the end, you ask? The Fremen woman's blue eyes seem to look through you, beyond you, to something you cannot perceive. That is not for us to know. Even prescience has its limits. She gestures toward a passageway leading deeper into the rock. "Come, there is more to see." You follow her through winding tunnels that seem to descend into the very heart of the planet. The air grows warmer, the spice scent stronger. Occasionally you pass Fremen going about their business in these underground chambers, children carrying water, women working at looms, men cleaning and repairing stillsuits. All regard you with curious but not hostile eyes. Finally, the tunnel opens into another large chamber, this one dimly lit by glow globes that cast soft blue light on the proceedings below. You stand on a ledge overlooking what appears to be a ritual space. Dozens of Fremen sit in concentric circles around a central figure, a young woman who moves in a sinuous dance while chanting in a language you don't recognize. "The spice trance," your guide explains quietly. She channels the memory of ancestors to guide the tribe through difficult decisions. The dancer's movements become more frenzied, her voice rising and falling in complex patterns. The watching Fremen sway slightly in unison, connected to her and through her to whatever wisdom she channels. "Is it real," you whisper, "or belief made manifest?" "Is there a difference?" the Fremen woman counters. The universe shapes itself around our perceptions as much as we are shaped by it. As you watch the ritual unfold, the chamber begins to shift subtly around you. The solid rock walls seem to become translucent, revealing layers of time-like geological strata. Through these temporal layers, you glimpse this same chamber as it existed in different eras, newly carved by the first Fremen settlers. Witness to secret meetings during Harkonnen rule, transformed into a place of worship as Paul Muad'Dib's religion took hold. The layers shift faster, blurring together, past and future becoming indistinguishable. You see the chamber in ruins, sand drifting through collapsed ceilings, then restored and filled with worshippers in unfamiliar garb, then transformed into something utterly different, its purpose forgotten and reinvented. "Time is not a line but a spiral," the Fremen woman says, her voice seeming to come from a great distance. "We return to the same points, but never in exactly the same way." The visions fade, the chamber re-solidifying around you. The ritual below continues, unaffected by your glimpse through time's veil. "I should not be here," you realize suddenly. "I'm an outsider. These are not my memories to witness." "Yet you are here," she responds. "Perhaps there is purpose in that." Before you can ask what she means, a tremor runs through the floor beneath your feet. The Fremen below pause in their ritual, looking up with expressions of alarm. A low rumbling sound grows in intensity, and dust begins to fall from the chamber ceiling. "Worm!" someone shouts from below, and immediately the assembly begins to disperse in practiced evacuation. Your guide grabs your arm. "We must go. Quickly!" She leads you through a different tunnel than the one you entered by. moving with the swift sure-footedness of one born to these passages. The rumbling intensifies and you feel the vibration in your bones. Behind you, the sound of falling rock suggests the ritual chamber has begun to collapse. The deep desert calls, your guide says cryptically as you run. It has been waiting for you. The tunnel begins to slope upward, and soon you see light ahead. Not the artificial glow of light sticks, but the harsh natural brilliance of Arrakis' sun. You emerge onto the surface of the desert, blinking in the sudden brightness. Sand stretches to the horizon in all directions, broken only by the rocky outcropping from which you've emerged. The sky above is a fierce blue, cloudless and unforgiving. Heat shimmers off the dunes, creating mirages that dance at the edge of vision. Behind you, the entrance to the siege is already being obscured by Fremen workers who expertly camouflage it to match the surrounding rock. Your guide stands beside you, watching the distant horizon, where a telltale dust cloud indicates the approach of a massive sandworm. "This is where I leave you," she says. "Where should I go?" you ask, suddenly aware of your vulnerability in this harsh environment. She points to a distant dune that seems no different from the hundreds surrounding it. "There, what you seek lies beyond." "What am I seeking?" "You already know," she says. "The heart of all memories, the place where past and future meet." She turns and disappears back into the hidden entrance of the siege, leaving you alone on the surface of Arrakis. The sun beats down, and already you feel the precious moisture being drawn from your body. There is no choice but to move, to follow her direction, or perish in the open. You begin to walk toward the distant dune, placing your feet carefully as you were shown in the ancestral memories, the proper way to move across sand without establishing rhythm, lest you summon the worms. The going is difficult, each step requiring conscious effort as your feet sink into the yielding surface. As you walk, the landscape seems to shift subtly around you. Occasionally, from the corner of your eye, you glimpse structures that aren't there when you turn to look directly. Ghostly outlines of buildings, gardens, forests that Arrakis has never known. Or perhaps they are visions of what might be, the future transformation dreamed of by generations of Fremen. The heat rises, and with it comes a strange clarity of thought. Your mind feels expanded, perhaps from lingering effects of the spice, or perhaps from the profound isolation of the deep desert. Thoughts unravel and reassemble themselves in new patterns. Memories, both your own and those glimpsed in the chamber of ancestral memory, surface and submerge like creatures in a vast ocean. Time becomes meaningless as you walk. The sun remains fixed overhead, neither rising nor setting, as if this journey exists outside normal temporal flow. The dune that is your destination neither approaches nor recedes, maintaining a constant distance despite your steady progress. Then, without warning, a voice speaks from the sand itself. "You walk between worlds, traveler." You stop, looking around for the source of the voice, but see only endless desert. "The past is buried beneath your feet," the voice continues. "The future hangs in the air you breathe, but you exist in the razor-thin present, the only moment that truly exists." "Who are you?" you ask the empty air. "I am what remains when all else is stripped away," comes the reply. "I am the memory of what was, and the dream of what might be." The sand before you begins to shift, rising and taking shape like a sculptor's clay molded by invisible hands. It forms a humanoid figure, featureless and golden in the harsh sunlight. On Seleucus Secundus, you saw how identity can be fragmented, the sand figure says. Among the Fremen, you saw how it can be preserved and shared. Now you must understand how it transforms. The figure gestures, and suddenly the desert around you is in motion, not from wind, but from something more profound. The dunes flow like liquid, reshaping themselves into new configurations. The horizon bends and ripples as if reality itself is being remade. All things change, the figure says. Planets, empires, people, only change itself is constant. The sand beneath your feet gives way, and you are falling once more. Not in panic, but in surrender to the inevitable pull of gravity and time. As you fall, the world dissolves around you, colors blending, sound becoming silence, sensation fading to a single point of awareness that is both infinitely small and vastly expanded. When your senses reassemble, you find yourself standing in a place unlike any you've seen before. A vast library with shelves stretching beyond sight in all directions. Each shelf holds not books, but small crystalline objects that glow with inner light. The air is still and heavy with significance. "Welcome to the repository," says a new voice, and you turn to see a figure in formal guild uniform, face partially hidden by a hood. Few find their way here. "What is this place?" you ask, voice hushed by the immensity surrounding you. "This is where memory becomes history, and history becomes legend," the guild navigator replies. "Every crystal contains the life experience of a single individual, their perceptions, their knowledge, their essence distilled." You approach the nearest shelf, drawn by a crystal that pulses with a familiar rhythm. Something about it calls to you, as if recognizing some essential aspect of your being. "May I?" you ask, hand hovering near the crystal. The navigator inclines their head in permission. You lift the crystal carefully. It feels warm in your palm, alive somehow. As you cradle it, images begin to form in your mind. Not imposed upon your consciousness like the visions in the mirror room, or shared like the ancestral memories in the Fremen chamber, but emerging from within as if they were your own forgotten experiences now recalled. You see a world of water, Caladan, home of House Atreides before their fateful move to Arrakis. You experience a childhood spent learning the responsibilities of governance, the weight of noble birth, the delicate balance of power among the great houses. You feel the love of family and the constant shadow of potential betrayal that haunts all who play the game of imperial politics. The memories shift, and you are on Arrakis, experiencing the fall of House Atreides through the eyes of one who lived it. You feel the bitter sting of betrayal, the desperate flight into the desert, the gradual acceptance among the Fremen, and eventually the rise to power that would reshape the Imperium itself. These are the memories of Paul Atreides, you realize. Muad'Dib the Kwisatz Haderach, whose coming changed everything, not just records of events, but the actual experience of living them, preserved somehow in this crystal repository. You gently replace the crystal on the shelf, feeling changed by what you've glimpsed. "How is this possible?" you ask the navigator. "The spice expands consciousness," they reply. "Those with sufficient sensitivity can, at the moment of death, transfer their accumulated experience into these receptacles. Not many choose this path. It requires tremendous discipline and sacrifice. And why preserve them here? Knowledge is never truly lost, only forgotten," the navigator says. "The guild safeguards these memories against the day they might be needed. Time is not as linear as most perceive it. Past, present, and future exist simultaneously from certain perspectives. You look out across the endless shelves, each crystal representing a life lived, experiences gained, wisdom earned at great cost. May I see more? The navigator gestures expansively. The repository is open to those who find it, but be warned, too many lives remembered can overwhelm your sense of self. Choose carefully. You wander among the shelves, drawn to crystals that seem to call to you. From each you glean fragments, a Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother's rigorous training and political maneuvering, a guild navigator's spice-enhanced perception of space-time folding around a hayliner, a Sardaukar commander's final battle, a Fremen woman's joy at seeing the first flowing water on a transforming Arrakis. Each memory adds another layer to your understanding, another perspective from which to view the complex tapestry of human experience across millennia of galactic history. Patterns emerge, cycles of rise and fall, ambition and hubris, destruction and renewal playing out across countless worlds and civilizations. Enough, the navigator says eventually. Your vessel can hold no more without breaking. You realize they are right. Your consciousness feels stretched, filled to capacity with lives not your own. You have glimpsed more of existence than any single individual was meant to comprehend. What now, you ask, feeling simultaneously expanded beyond normal human awareness and acutely aware of your own limitations. Now you return, the navigator says simply, carrying what you have learned. Return where? To the beginning. To yourself. The circle completes. The library begins to fade around you, the endless shelves of memory crystals dissolving like mist before dawn. The guild navigator's form becomes transparent, then vanishes entirely, leaving you in a space of pure white light that gradually resolves into the mirror room on Salusa Secundus. You stand once more in that circular chamber, surrounded by reflective surfaces that now show only your own image, unvariated and consistent from every angle. The spectral instructor is gone, the whispering voices are silent. Only you remain, facing yourself from every direction. I understand now, you say to your reflection, voice echoing in the empty chamber. The mirrors don't fragment identity, they reveal its many facets. The Sardaukar stripped themselves to become weapons, but in doing so denied the strength that comes from wholeness. Your reflection nods in unison, a single movement repeated infinitely. The Fremen preserved their past. The guild archived it. Both recognized what the Sardaukar forgot. That memory is not weakness but strength, not a burden but a foundation. As you speak these truths, the mirrors begin to change, not shattering but softening, becoming translucent rather than reflective. Beyond them, you glimpse faces watching you, the old Sardaukar soldier, the Fremen woman, the guild navigator, and countless others whose memories you touched on this strange journey. We are all reflections of one another, you realize, separate yet connected across time and space. What seems like fragmentation is actually infinite facets of a single greater consciousness experiencing itself through countless individual lives. With this ultimate understanding, the mirror room dissolves completely. The walls fade away, the ceiling vanishes, the floor beneath your feet becomes insubstantial. You are floating in a void that is not empty but full beyond comprehension, a space between spaces, a moment between moments. And in this liminal place, a final voice speaks. Now sleep, traveler, sleep and remember. The void cradles you like a child, and you surrender to its embrace. As consciousness recedes, you carry with you the infinite reflections, the ancestral memories, the preserved wisdom of ages. no longer overwhelming but integrated into a new understanding of yourself as both singular and part of something vast beyond imagining. The last thing you perceive before dreams claim you completely is the distant sound of sand shifting on a desert planet, the subtle vibration of a universe in constant transformation, and the gentle reminder that you too are always changing, always becoming, always part of the eternal cycle of memory and renewal that binds all existence together. Deep within the ancient desert of Arrakis, where the sands shift and whisper with the memories of countless generations, a lone traveler makes camp as twilight descends. They have journeyed far across the dunes, following half-forgotten maps and tales told by weathered spice traders in distant ports. Their destination, the legendary ruins of the First Siege, birthplace of Fremen culture and keeper of secrets buried by time and sand. The traveler sets up a small tent on a rocky outcropping that offers some protection from the desert's nocturnal predators. As they work, they cast occasional glances at the crumbled stone structures half buried in the nearby dunes, hollowed-out chambers and collapsed tunnels that once formed a thriving community. Now, only broken walls and sand-filled passages remain, like the bleached bones of some massive creature long deceased. Night falls quickly on Arrakis, the transition from day to night as sharp as a crease knife's edge. The stars emerge in their thousands, then tens of thousands, wheeling overhead like slow-moving fireflies against the black velvet of space. Their light casts pale silver shadows across the ruined siege, creating patterns that seem almost deliberate, as if the stones themselves are attempting to communicate through shadow and starlight. The traveler finishes their modest meal and sits before a small, carefully managed flame. Fire is precious here, where every bit of fuel must be carried or scavenged. They sip water sparingly from a rehydration tube, conscious of its sacred value in this parched landscape. Their eyes drift repeatedly to the ruins, drawn by some subtle magnetism that defies logical explanation. Tomorrow, they murmur to themselves, I'll explore properly in the daylight. But as the night deepens and the temperature drops precipitously, something unusual begins to occur. A wind rises. Not the scorching daytime gales that scour flesh from bone, nor the occasional Coriolis storms that can swallow entire settlements. This is different. A cool, steady breeze that seems to emanate not from any direction across the desert, but from somewhere else entirely, as if blowing through a crack in time itself. The traveler pulls their stillsuit hood tighter, surprised by the cold carried on this strange wind. There is something else unusual about it, something that makes the fine hairs on their arms stand erect despite the insulating layer of their suit. The wind carries sounds, faint at first, then increasingly distinct. Voice, not the random whistling of air through stone apertures that might mimic human speech, but actual voices. Low chants, whispered conversations, occasional laughter, and underneath it all, a steady current of melancholy that feels ancient and profound. The traveler stares into the fire, trying to convince themselves that fatigue and isolation are playing tricks on their senses, but the voices persist, becoming clearer as the wind strengthens. Some speak in a language the traveler recognizes as Chakobsa, the hunting language of the Fremen. Others speak in tongues so archaic that understanding lies beyond reach, and some don't speak at all, but sing, wordless melodies that resonate with a sadness almost too deep to bear. Just the wind, the traveler mutters, feeding another precious stick to the fire. Just the wind through the stones. But even as they speak, they know this explanation falls short. The voices carry too much intention, too much emotion to be mere acoustic phenomena. There is presence in them, many presences, layered atop one another like geological strata, each representing a different era of the Sietch's long history. The sleep seems both impossible and inevitable as the night grows deeper. The traveler retreats to their tent, where they lie awake listening to the symphony of voices carried on the impossible wind. Exhaustion eventually overcomes unease, and they drift toward unconsciousness, with the voices following them down into the dark. The transition is seamless. One moment they are lying in their tent, the next they are standing upright in the full light of day, but not their day. The Sietch around them is whole and vibrant, its stone walls unbroken, its passages clear of sand and debris. Fremen move about purposefully, engaged in the 1,000 daily tasks necessary for survival in the desert's unforgiving embrace. And the traveler has changed as well. Looking down, they see not their own body clothed in a still suit, but the form of an elderly Fremen, male, with hands weathered by decades of harsh desert existence. The traveler raises these unfamiliar hands, flexes fingers that respond as if they've always belonged to them, and understands with dream logic certainty that they are simultaneously themselves and someone else. A Fremen elder whose life was lived in this place long ago. "Kashara!" calls a voice, and the traveler turns automatically, responding to a name they have never heard yet somehow know intimately to be their own. A woman approaches, perhaps 60 years old, her eyes the total deep blue of long-term melange consumption. She wears her years with dignity, her movements economical but graceful, her face a map of wind-carved wrinkles that frame those extraordinary eyes. "The scouts have returned from the South Passage," she says without preamble. "Amtal reports movement near the ridge of the Needle, possibly Imperial scouts, though they fly no banners." The traveler feels their mouth respond, speaking words that emerge from somewhere beyond their conscious control. "Have Stilgar take 5 men and observe from the high point. No engagement unless threatened. We can't risk exposing the Sietch, not with the water ceremony so near." The woman nods, her expression revealing nothing, but the traveler, Khashara, senses her approval. There is history between them, deep and complex, a lifetime of shared experiences that the traveler can feel hovering just beyond conscious recall. "Will you walk with me before the evening meal?" she asks, and though her tone is casual, the traveler perceives layers of meaning beneath the simple question. "Of course, Leia," the name comes unbidden to the traveler's lips. "I would like nothing better." They walk together through the Sietch, acknowledging the respectful nods of younger Fremen as they pass. The traveler feels the weight of responsibility that comes with Kashara's position, the expectation of wisdom and leadership that accompanies advanced age in Fremen society. But there is comfort in it too, a sense of purpose and belonging that transcends individual concerns. As they move through a wide chamber where children practice water discipline under the watchful eye of a stern-faced woman, the traveler notices something odd. Occasionally, a figure will seem to flicker, becoming momentarily transparent before solidifying again. At first, they attribute this to the interplay of light through the cleverly designed light tubes that bring illumination from the surface, but the phenomenon continues even in areas of consistent lighting. "Do you see that?" the traveler asks, forgetting momentarily that they are speaking through Kashara. Leha looks at them curiously. "See what, my husband?" The traveler hesitates, unsure how to explain. Before they can formulate a response, a child's voice rises above the general murmur of the Sietch, clear and piercing. "For the water, 2 for the sand, 3 for the spice in the palm of your hand." The counting continues, the numbers climbing steadily in a sing-song cadence that seems both innocent and ominous. The traveler looks for the source but cannot locate the specific child among the many in the chamber. The old counting game, Leha says with a small smile. Do you remember teaching it to our grandchildren? They pass it to the younger ones now, though I think the meaning has changed over the generations. The traveler nods, though they have no memory of creating or teaching such a rhyme. They continue walking, passing through a narrow corridor that opens suddenly into a small private chamber. Here, Leha stops and turns to face them directly. You are troubled, she says, not a question but a statement of fact. Again, words come to the traveler that are not their own. I dreamed of the betrayal again last night. After all these years, it still haunts me. Leha's expression softens. She reaches out and places her hand directly over the traveler's heart, a gesture so intimate and charged with meaning that they feel their breath catch. The past cannot be changed, she says simply. We honor the dead by remembering, but we serve the living by continuing. Her eyes, those deep wells of blue upon blue, hold wisdom and sorrow in equal measure. Though she speaks no further words, the traveler feels communication passing between them. A lifetime of shared understanding distilled into a single touch and gaze. The moment breaks as a young man appears at the chamber entrance, his expression urgent. Naib Kashara, forgive the interruption. The water counters have completed their tally for the ceremony. They await your inspection. With a nod to Leha that conveys both regret and promise, the traveler follows the messenger through passages that twist and descend into the heart of the siege. They arrive at a chamber smaller than many they've passed, but clearly of great importance. Here, 3 elderly Fremen stand before a series of marked containers, their faces solemn with responsibility. The counting is complete, Naib, says the eldest, a man so ancient that his skin resembles parchment stretched over bone. 117 water rings to be distributed among the families. The death water of our brothers has increased our wealth. The traveler feels Kashara nod with appropriate gravity. You have done well, Chamar. The ceremony will proceed at sunset. As the water counters bow slightly and turn their attention back to their precious charge, the traveler notices another of those strange flickering effects. This time affecting not just individuals but the entire chamber, which seems to waver like a mirage before stabilizing again. And in that moment of instability they glimpse something else, the same chamber but ruined, sand-filled, abandoned. The vision lasts only an instant before the solid reality of the living siege reasserts itself. But it leaves the traveler shaken. Something is wrong with this place, or perhaps something is wrong with time itself in this place. The traveler is experiencing not just a dream, but something deeper, some connection to memories preserved in the very stones of the siege. They continue through the day as Kashara, attending to the duties of a Naib, settling minor disputes, consulting on water allocations, reviewing the training of young fighters. Throughout it all, the traveler remains aware of their dual nature, simultaneously observer and participant in a life not their own. As evening approaches, the siege becomes increasingly busy with preparations for what appears to be a significant ceremony. The traveler gathers from conversations around them that this is to be a commemoration of some sort, though the exact nature remains unclear, until they overhear 2 women speaking as they hang fabric decorations in the main gathering chamber. 50 years since the night of silence, says one. Her voice hushed despite the apparent absence of anyone who might overhear. I was only a child, but I remember the fear. Speak not of it, the other woman responds sharply. Tonight we honor the lost, not relive the treachery. The water belongs to the tribe. Before the traveler can learn more, they are called away to don ceremonial robes befitting Kashara's status as Naib. Leha assists them, her movements practiced and intimate. The traveler feels Kashara's love for this woman like a physical presence, deep and abiding despite, or perhaps because of, all they have weathered together. "You are thinking of Jahid," Leha says quietly as she adjusts the ceremonial knife at their belt. It is not a question. The traveler feels Kashara's throat tighten with emotion. He would have been 70 today. Leha's hands still for a moment. "Yes. Our firstborn would have been an elder now, perhaps Naib in your place." Her voice holds remarkable steadiness despite the weight of her words. "He watches us from the gathering of souls. Tonight, we honor him and all who fell." As sunset approaches, the entire Siege population gathers in the largest chamber, a space hollowed from the living rock and enlarged over generations. Hundreds of Fremen stand in concentric circles, their stillsuits replaced with ceremonial robes for this rare indoor occasion. At the center stands a raised platform where the water counters have arranged the precious containers that hold the tribe's wealth. The traveler finds themselves on this platform as Kashara, the focus of hundreds of pairs of blue within blue eyes. They feel the weight of ceremony pressing down, the expectation of ritual, words and actions that Kashara knows, but they do not. Panic begins to rise. What if they fail to perform correctly? What if they dishonor these people and their solemn occasion through ignorance? But as the last light fades from the cleverly designed apertures overhead, leaving the chamber illuminated only by glow globes set at strategic intervals, the traveler feels Kashara's consciousness strengthen within them. The elder's memories surface with greater clarity, providing the knowledge needed for what comes next. "Water is the beginning and the end," the traveler says, Kashara's voice emerging strong and clear. "From water we come, to water we return. The flesh is the temporary vessel, the water is eternal." The assembled Fremen respond in unison. The water belongs to the tribe. 50 years have passed since the night of silence, Kashara continues, and the traveler feels the profound grief behind the words. 50 years since betrayal came from within and without. 50 years since we lost 37 of our brothers and sisters, whose water now strengthens us. A murmur passes through the assembly. Not words, but a sound of collective remembrance, a shared exhalation of sorrow. We gather to honor their sacrifice, to remember their names, to ensure that the lesson of that night is never forgotten. Kashara's voice hardens. Trust given blindly is water poured on sand. Vigilance is the price of survival. "Vigilance is the price of survival," the assembly echoes. The ceremony proceeds with the reading of names, 37 of them, each followed by a moment of silence and the ceremonial pouring of a small measure of water into a common basin. As each name is spoken, the traveler sees brief images flash through Kashara's memory. Faces, moments, relationships. These were not abstractions, but people known personally to the Naib. Friends, family, tribespeople. When the name Jahid ibn Kashara is spoken, the traveler feels such a surge of grief that for a moment they fear they might collapse. This was Kashara's son, barely 20 years old, killed while defending the Siege's children during the attack commemorated by this ceremony. The final name is spoken, the final measure of water poured. The basin now holds a significant amount of precious liquid, a sacrifice of immense value in this water-starved world. Kashara raises his hands over the basin, and when he speaks again, his voice carries a rhythmic quality that suggests words passed down through generations. Water shared is strength multiplied. As we drink of one source, we become one people. As we remember as one, we honor as one. The basin is carefully lifted and carried to each member of the tribe, who in turn dip a finger into the communal water and touch it to their lips. A symbolic sharing that connects each individual to the collective memory being honored. As the ritual concludes and the mood shifts subtly toward the feast that will follow, the traveler notices something alarming. The flickering effect they observed earlier has intensified. Entire sections of the chamber now phase in and out of existence, revealing glimpses of the ruined future state between moments of solid presence. And there are other figures moving through the space now, transparent forms that the Fremen around them seem unable to perceive. Some of these ghostly presences wear still suits of unfamiliar design. Others are dressed in clothing the traveler recognizes from their own time. These are visitors to the ruins, the traveler realizes. People who explored the abandoned siege in the years and centuries after its fall. Their timelines are bleeding through, overlapping with the memory of the siege in its prime. One of these spectral figures passes directly through a group of Fremen children without disturbing them. The figure, a tall woman in a partially damaged still suit, pauses and seems to look directly at the traveler, her expression registering surprise. Can she see me? The traveler wonders. Are we somehow connecting across time? Before this question can be resolved, a deep, resonant tone sounds, signaling the beginning of the feast. The transparent futures fade temporarily as the present moment of memory reasserts itself. Fremen move with purpose, rearranging themselves around low tables that are brought into the chamber. The atmosphere shifts from solemn remembrance to determined celebration. Life continuing despite loss, perhaps the most profound defiance possible. The traveler finds themselves seated at the head table, with Leia beside them, and other elders arranged according to some hierarchy they can sense but not fully comprehend. Food is brought, simple fare made precious by its scarcity in this harsh environment. Spice is present in everything, its cinnamon scent permeating the air. As the meal progresses, conversation flows around the traveler. They allow Kashara to respond appropriately while they observe, struck by the complex social dynamics at play. Despite the apparent unity demonstrated during the ceremony, they detect undercurrents of tension, particularly between several younger men seated at a nearby table. Leia notices their attention. Sharan grows restless, she murmurs, indicating a muscular man of perhaps 35 with a distinctive facial scar. He believes the time for hiding is past, that we should strike at the Harkonnen outposts directly. The traveler feels Kashara's concern. He is not alone in that belief. No, Leia agrees. The young always hunger for action. They did not see what became of Siege Tabalai when they attempted such resistance. Before they can discuss this further, the chamber suddenly darkens. The glow globes dim simultaneously, plunging the space into near total darkness. A confused murmur rises from the assembly, but before alarm can spread, a new light appears. A doorway, shimmering into existence in a section of wall that the traveler is certain had been solid stone moments before. The doorway emits a soft blue radiance that illuminates the chamber with ghostly light. Through this impossible aperture, the traveler glimpses a scene that seems both part of and separate from the feast occurring around them. A smaller chamber, intimately arranged with cushions and low tables. A dozen figures engaged in intense conversation, their expressions grave. At the center, a man the traveler recognizes as a younger Kashara, perhaps 20 years before the current memory. and beside him, a figure whose presence sends a shock of recognition through both Traveler and Kashara. Jahid, the son whose death they commemorate tonight. Every Fremen in the main chamber has fallen silent, staring at the glowing doorway and the scene beyond. This is not part of the ceremony. This is something unexplainable, even within the already unusual experience the traveler is having. "Father," whispers an elderly man seated nearby, his eyes fixed on the youthful figure of Jahid with naked longing. "Brother," says another, even as tears begin to track down his weathered cheeks. The traveler understands that they are all seeing it. This window into the past is not just their own vision, but a collective experience. Through Kashara, they feel a profound disorientation. What force could create such a manifestation? Within the vision beyond the doorway, the conversation continues, unaware of being observed. Though no sound crosses the threshold, the traveler can somehow understand what is being said, as if the meaning transmits directly to their mind. The Imperial agent offers protection in exchange for information, says a man the traveler doesn't recognize. Regular shipments, water for the tribe, immunity from Harkonnen raids. "And what does this protection cost us?" asks the younger Kashara, his voice heavy with skepticism. "Only information about the other Seachers," the man replies. "Their locations, their strengths, nothing we would not share with trusted allies." "These are not allies," Jahid interjects forcefully. "The Imperium serves its own interests, always. Today they oppose the Harkonnens, tomorrow they will collaborate with them if it suits their purpose." The man's expression hardens. "You are young, Jahid. You do not understand the complexities of—" "I understand loyalty," Jahid interrupts. "I understand that betraying our brother and sister Fremen to curry favor with off-worlders violates everything we stand for." The scene shifts slightly, revealing more of the chamber and its occupants. The traveler notices something they missed initially, the subtle positioning of several men near the chamber's only exit, their hands close to concealed weapons. With sudden clarity, they understand what they are witnessing. The meeting that preceded the betrayal, the seeds of the tragedy being planted. In the main chamber, the watching Fremen have realized this too. A low sound builds, not quite a moan, not quite a growl, but a collective expression of renewed grief and rage. Leia's hand finds the travelers, gripping with surprising strength. "We never knew," she whispers. "We never knew exactly how it began, who was first approached, what was promised." The vision through the doorway continues to unfold, revealing more details of the conspiracy that would ultimately lead to the attack commemorated by this very ceremony. The traveler watches as alliances form and fracture within that small room, as the younger Kashara and Jahid stand increasingly alone in their opposition to collaboration with Imperial forces. Finally, the man who proposed the arrangement speaks words that send a chill through both the traveler and Kashara. "If you will not see reason, then perhaps the Siege requires new leadership, one that understands the value of powerful allies." The glowing doorway abruptly vanishes, plunging the main chamber back into the normal illumination of the glow globes. The assembled Fremen sit in stunned silence, processing what they have witnessed. The traveler feels Kashara's mind reeling with implications. Names of conspirators previously unknown, details of the plot never before revealed. "Now we know," says someone in the silence, voice thick with emotion. "After 50 years, we finally know." The feast forgotten, discussion erupts throughout the chamber. Old wounds reopened, suspicions confirmed, questions long unanswered finally addressed. The traveler feels Kashara trying to restore order, but the revelation has unleashed too much emotion to be easily contained. and throughout it all the flickering intensifies. The solid reality of the memory continues to destabilize. Sections of the chamber phasing between past glory and future ruin with increasing frequency. The ghostly figures of later visitors multiply, walking obliviously through the increasingly agitated. The traveler feels a tugging sensation, as if their connection to Kashara is weakening. The elder's thoughts become harder to access, his emotions more distant. At the same time, the traveler's awareness of their own identity strengthens, bringing with it an understanding that this experience, however real it feels, cannot last. In a moment of startling clarity between the fluctuations of time, Leha turns to them with an expression that suggests she sees beyond Kashara to the traveler within. "You came seeking knowledge," she says, her voice somehow audible despite the cacophony surrounding them. "Now you understand. Nothing is ever truly lost. The stones remember. The wind carries voices. The past exists alongside the present for those who know how to listen." She places her hand once more over their heart, but this time the traveler feels the touch directly, not filtered through Kashara's experience. "When you wake," Leia continues, "you will carry this with you. The memory of our joy and our pain, our triumph and our failure. This is the gift and the burden of the first siege, to ensure that some things are never forgotten, no matter how deeply buried in sand they may become." The chamber around them dissolves entirely now, the solid memory giving way completely to the fluctuating overlay of different times. The traveler sees the siege in its earliest days being carved from the rock, sees it in its prime as a thriving community, sees the night of the attack with ghostly figures locked in desperate combat, sees the gradual abandonment as survivors relocate to safer havens, sees the long, slow burial as sand reclaims the human endeavor, sees countless visitors over centuries coming to study, salvage, or simply bear witness to what once was. All of these time frames exist simultaneously in this moment of dissolution, as if time itself has shattered into fragments that now surround the traveler like falling glass. Through it all, Leha's hand remains steady over their heart, anchoring them amidst the temporal chaos. Her blue within blue eyes hold theirs, conveying a final message that requires no words. "Remember us." Then she too fades, and the traveler is falling, spinning through darkness, punctuated by brief flashes of light and sound, fragments of lives lived and lost in the first siege, across its long history. They jolt awake in their tent, heart racing, breath coming in short gasps. Outside, the wind still blows, that strange cold wind that seems to emanate from the past rather than any physical direction. But now the traveler understands what they are hearing in its ghostly voice. Names. The wind is reciting names. Moving on unsteady legs, the traveler emerges from their tent into the star-filled night. The ruins of the first siege stand as they did before, broken, sand-filled, abandoned. Yet somehow they appear different to the traveler's eyes, as if overlaid with an after-image of what once was. The wind circles them, carrying its burden of names. The traveler recognizes some now: Jahed, Leha, Shamar, and finally, Kashara. Each name brings with it a flash of memory, a fragment of a life once lived within these stones. Driven by an impulse they cannot fully articulate, the traveler approaches the ruins. Where before they saw only tumbled stone and sand-choked passages, they now perceive the ghost of a structure. The siege as it was in its prime, visible not to the eye but to some deeper sense, awakened by their experience. They find themselves standing before a section of seemingly solid rock face. Without hesitation, they press their hand against a specific point, then slide it in a pattern that comes from memory, not their own. A section of stone shifts slightly, revealing a narrow opening, a secret way into the heart of the Siege, known only to the Naib and select elders, preserved despite the general ruin. The passage beyond is partially blocked by fallen debris, but passable. The traveler retrieves a light from their camp and enters cautiously, ducking under a collapsed support beam and squeezing through a narrow gap. Beyond lies a small chamber, remarkably well preserved compared to the exposed portions of the Siege. Dust covers everything, undisturbed for perhaps centuries, but the room's contents remain largely intact. This was a private sanctuary, sealed against casual discovery. On a stone shelf along one wall sit a row of small containers. Water rings, the traveler realizes, the physical manifestation of Fremen wealth. Beside them lies a book, bound in what appears to be spice fiber paper, its pages brittle but legible. Carefully, reverently, the traveler opens this precious artifact. Inside, written in a precise hand, they find a record. Names, dates, events chronicled with meticulous care. This is Kashara's personal account of the betrayal, the attack, and its aftermath, preserved against the day when someone might need to know the truth. The traveler reads by the light of their small lamp, absorbing details that confirm and expand upon what they experienced in their dream vision. Here is the evidence that it was real, or at least that the events they witnessed through Kashara's eyes actually occurred. When they finish reading, they carefully return the book to its place. The water rings they leave untouched. They belong to the tribe, not to any individual, regardless of how much time has passed. As they prepare to leave the hidden chamber, the traveler notices something scratched into the stone wall beside the entrance. A simple pattern that would be meaningless to most observers. But with the knowledge gained through their connection to Kashara, they recognize it as a stylized representation of counting marks, 1 through 37. One mark for each person lost on the night of silence. One mark for each name the wind still carries. The traveler traces these marks with their fingertips, establishing a final physical connection to the memory they have experienced. As they do, they whisper words that come from somewhere beyond their conscious mind. The water belongs to the tribe. The memory belongs to the future. Outside, the strange wind has calmed, though a faint whispering remains just at the threshold of hearing. The stars continue their slow wheel overhead, measuring time in a way that makes human concerns seem briefly insignificant. The traveler returns to their camp, knowing they will sleep deeply now, without dreams. Tomorrow they will continue their journey across Arrakis, carrying with them the weight and the gift of remembrance, a small piece of the vast tapestry of human experience that makes up the history of this harsh, beautiful world. As consciousness fades, they hear once more the child's counting song carried on the night air. 1 for the water, 2 for the sand, 3 for the spice in the palm of your hand, 4 for the future, 5 for the past, 6 for the secrets meant to last. The words fade into the rhythm of their slowing breath as sleep claims them, deep and dreamless beneath the eternal desert stars. The air on Gidi Prime tasted of metal and despair. Corvin wiped the back of his hand across his forehead, leaving a streak of black industrial lubricant to join the countless others that marked his weathered face. 12 hours into his shift at Processing Plant 16, and the massive machinery continued its relentless rhythm, pounding like the heartbeat of some enormous, merciless beast. Above him, conveyor belts transported ore extracted from the planet's dying core. Below, collection tanks gathered the toxic runoff that would later be processed into secondary products. Nothing wasted, everything exploited, the Harkonnen way. The heat was oppressive, the noise deafening, even through his regulation ear protectors. But complaining meant punishment. And punishment on Giedi Prime was something to be avoided at all costs. Corvin's eyes burned from the chemical fumes that perpetually hung in the air. His lungs ached with each breath. 20 years he had worked in the Harkonnen factories, and each day took another small piece of his health, his humanity, his hope. Like the planet itself, he was being hollowed out from within, sacrificed to the insatiable greed of House Harkonnen. In the brief moments when the machinery cycled between operations, Corvin caught fragments of conversation from his fellow workers, hushed exchanges about decreased rations, increased quotas, and the latest public executions in Central Square. No one spoke openly of resistance or rebellion. The Baron's surveillance was too thorough, his mentats calculations too precise. Those who harbored such thoughts learned to bury them deeply, behind eyes rendered vacant by exhaustion and fear. Section 7, cycling down for maintenance, announced a metallic voice over the facility's comm system. Workers proceed to holding area for inspection and shift rotation. Corvin joined the shuffling line of grey uniformed labourers moving toward the designated area. Inspection meant standing at attention while overseers checked for stolen materials, contraband, or signs of inadequate work performance. But today, something was different. Stationed at the inspection point were not the usual overseers but Harkonnen elite guards, their black uniforms adorned with the family crest, a ram's head, stylized and threatening. A murmur of anxiety passed through the worker line. Elite guards meant high-level scrutiny, possibly even the presence of a family member. Such attention never brought anything positive. "Spice check," announced the lead guard, his voice amplified by his helmet's system. "Random selection for contraband spice detection. Step forward when designated." Corvin felt his heart drop. He had managed to conceal the small amount of melange he had obtained through channels he would rather not think about, a tiny indulgence to briefly escape the crushing reality of Giedi Prime. The spice was hidden in a secret compartment in his work boots, a modification made by a now disappeared acquaintance who had specialized in such adaptations. The guards moved along the line, selecting every fifth worker. As they approached Corvin's position, he calculated rapidly. 4 workers ahead of him had been selected, which meant he would be passed over. Relief began to bloom, only to be crushed when the guard stopped directly in front of him. "You," the guard said, pointing. "Step forward." Corvin's mouth went dry. Had they changed the selection pattern deliberately? Did they somehow know? The Harkonnen mentat could calculate such probabilities, predict behaviors based on past patterns. "I said step forward," the guard repeated, his hand moving to the neural whip at his belt. Corvin complied, his legs moving automatically while his mind raced through increasingly desperate scenarios. The penalty for spice possession by workers was public flogging, followed by assignment to the deepest, most dangerous mining operations, a death sentence delivered over excruciating weeks or months. He was directed to a scanning arch where another guard waited with a handheld detection device. As Corvin stood rigid with fear, the scanner passed over his body from head to foot, pausing near his right boot. The guard checked the readout, his expression unreadable behind his helmet's faceplate. "Proceed to secondary inspection," the guard said, gesturing to a small enclosure where a table and 2 additional guards waited. Corvin's last hope evaporated. Secondary inspection meant physical search, which meant discovery, which meant punishment. His vision narrowed, dark spots appearing at the edges as his breathing accelerated. If he ran, they would stun him immediately. If he fought, the outcome would be the same, but with additional charges of resistance. There was nowhere to go, nothing to do but walk the final steps to his fate. Inside the enclosure, a guard directed him to remove his boots. Corvin complied mechanically, knowing that the moment the second boot came off, his secret would be revealed. He watched as if from a great distance, as the guard took the boot, examined it carefully, and found the hidden compartment with practiced efficiency. "Contraband detected," the guard announced. "Mélange, approximately 2 grams. The lead guard stepped forward, towering over Corvin. "Worker designation and section." "Orkvinaltan, Section 7, Processing Plant 16, he responded automatically, the words falling from numb lips. "Corvin Altan, you are found in violation of Imperial and Harkonnen law regarding controlled substances. You will be held for processing and public discipline, sentence to be determined by the Mentat's office." Corvin barely heard the formal declaration. His mind had retreated to a place beyond fear, a strange calm descending as the guard secured his wrists with neurobindings that would paralyze his arms if he attempted to resist. As they led him away past the silent ranks of his fellow workers, Corvin felt the weight of their averted gazes. No one would speak for him. No one would remember him. On Gidi Prime, to be noticed was dangerous. To be associated with the condemned, potentially fatal. The holding cell was small and featureless, its walls a dull grey metal that seemed to absorb both light and hope. A single light panel in the ceiling cast harsh illumination that allowed no shadows, no place to hide from observation. The only furnishing was a flat bench extending from one wall, too narrow for comfort, deliberately designed to prevent sleep. Yet sleep was what Corvin craved most desperately, not just as an escape from his circumstances, but because the spice was still in his system, the residue from his last small dose taken during his meal break. He could feel it in his bloodstream, heightening his senses, making the drab cell walls pulse with subtle patterns invisible to normal perception. If he could sleep, the spice would take him elsewhere, anywhere but here, before the punishment began. The Nora bindings had been removed once he was secured in the cell, allowing him limited movement. He sat on the bench, then lay back, ignoring its discomfort. The guards would return soon to take him to the discipline chamber. Until then, he would seek what escape he could. Corvin closed his burning eyes, focusing on his breathing, as he had learned to do during the brief moments of relief his secret spice usage had provided. In, out, steady. The heightened awareness brought by the melange made him conscious of every sensation. The recycled air moving across his skin, the distant vibration of machinery transmitted through the floor, the precise rhythm of his own heartbeat. Gradually, the harsh reality of the cell receded. The spice in his system, though minimal, was enough to blur the boundaries between consciousness and unconsciousness, between reality and dream. Corvin felt himself sliding into that liminal space, his body remaining on the hard bench, while his mind began to drift free. The first change he noticed was the sound, or rather, the absence of it. The omnipresent mechanical drone of Gidi Prime faded to silence so complete it seemed to have physical presence. Then came a shift in perception, a sense of movement without motion, as if he were descending slowly through layers of the planet itself. Darkness enveloped him, but it was not the oppressive artificial dark of a Harkonnen prison. This darkness felt ancient and patient, filled with a quiet expectancy. Corvin realized he could see despite the absence of light, not with his physical eyes, but with some other sense awakened by the spice. He found himself standing at the entrance to a vast network of tunnels that extended in all directions, curving away into blackness. The walls were not the manufactured metal and plastcrete of Harkonnen construction, but raw earth, stained and discolored by centuries of industrial runoff. In places, the soil had hardened into formations resembling frozen black tears, as if the planet itself were weeping for what had been done to it. Small rivulets of oily liquid trickled down the tunnel walls, collecting in channels worn into the floor by their passage. The air was heavy with the scent of minerals and decay, not the artificial chemical stench of the factories above, but something older and more fundamental. Corvin took a hesitant step forward, and as his foot touched the ground, he realized the floor was not solid earth, but a layer of small, irregular objects that shifted beneath his weight. Looking down, he saw with shock that he was standing on bones, thousands upon thousands of them, forming a carpet that extended as far as his enhanced vision could perceive. Human bones. Small, delicate phalanges from fingers and toes, the curved protective cages of ribs, the complex architecture of vertebrae, and skulls, countless skulls, in various states of preservation, from those so ancient they were little more than fragile calcium outlines to others that seemed disturbingly recent. Horror rose in Corvin's throat, and he nearly retreated, willing himself to wake, but something held him in place. Not fear, but a sudden sense that he was not alone in this subterranean realm. "Themai won't hurt you," came a voice from nearby, soft and reassuring. Corvin turned to see a small flame hovering at eye level, illuminating the face of a young girl, perhaps 12 or 13 years old. Her features delicate, but marked by the same industrial grime that covered all Gieti Prime's worker class. Her clothing was from another era, a simple shift of rough fabric that might have been worn by factory workers a century earlier. "Who are you?" Corvin asked, his voice sounding strange in the absolute stillness of the catacombs. "I have many names," the girl replied, "or no name at all, depending on how you choose to see me." She held out her hand, in which the small flame danced without consuming her flesh. "Would you like to see them? They've waited so long to be acknowledged." Corvin hesitated, then nodded. The girl smiled, a simple expression of genuine warmth that seemed impossibly out of place in this world of bones and darkness. "Take this," she said, extending her hand so that the flame transferred to Corvin's palm. Like her, he felt no heat or burning, only a gentle warmth. The light helps them remember who they were. With the flame guiding him, Corvin followed the girl deeper into the tunnel network. The bones shifted and clicked beneath their feet, occasionally arranging themselves into brief patterns before collapsing back into seeming randomness. The sound should have been macabre, but instead carried an almost musical quality, like abstract wind chimes moved by subterranean currents. "How far down are we?" Corvin asked as they walked. "I didn't know there were caverns beneath the Harkonnen fortresses." "Most don't," the girl replied. "The Baron's ancestors built their first strongholds on top of the old mining operations, then expanded outward. When the mines collapsed or were abandoned, they became convenient places to dispose of those who were no longer useful." She gestured to the bones beneath their feet, or those who resisted. Corvin felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. "These are all victims," the girl confirmed. "Workers who died in accidents, prisoners who perished under questioning, people who simply disappeared when it was convenient for the Harkonnens to make them vanish." She paused, looking back at him with eyes that suddenly seemed much older than her apparent age. "Like you will, tomorrow." The words landed like physical blows, though Corvin had already accepted his fate. Hearing it stated so matter-of-factly by this strange child guide made it suddenly, painfully real. "Why am I here?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. To witness, the girl said simply, and to listen. They had reached a junction where the tunnel expanded into a larger chamber. Here the bone layer was thicker, piled in places into small mounds like drifts of terrible snow. The flame in Corvin's hand brightened, casting light into the furthest corners of the space. As the illumination spread, the air began to shimmer. At first, Corvin thought it was merely the interplay of light and shadow, or perhaps an effect of the spice enhancing his perception, but the shimmering intensified, coalescing into translucent forms scattered throughout the chamber. Human shapes of varying distinctness, some barely visible outlines, others detailed enough that he could make out facial features and expressions. Ghosts, or memories given form. Whatever they were, they moved with purpose, reenacting scenes from their lives, or from their deaths. Some appeared chained or restrained, their movements limited and pained. Others stood proud and defiant, facing invisible adversaries with chins raised and shoulders squared. Corvin watched, transfixed, as a middle-aged man in tattered clothes knelt before an unseen inquisitor, his mouth moving in what appeared to be desperate pleas. Nearby, a woman cradled something in her arms. An infant, Corvin realized with horror, as she backed away from approaching figures, her face a mask of terror and determination. Dee may relive their final moments, the girl explained quietly, over and over, hoping that someday someone will see, will know what happened to them. But why show me? Corvin asked, struggling to process the spectral tableau. I'm no one, a factory worker who will join them tomorrow. Because you can still feel, the girl said. The spice has opened you to them, and because you understand. Before Corvin could question further, one of the ghostly figures noticed them, or noticed him specifically. It was an older man, his transparent form bearing the marks of severe beating. He approached Corvin with a halting gait, one leg dragging uselessly behind him. When he spoke, the words seemed to bypass Corvin's ears, arriving directly in his mind. You wear their mark. Corvin looked down at his factory uniform with its small Harkonnen crest on the breast pocket, the brand of his servitude. I'm a worker, he said defensively, not one of them. The ghost's expression remained impassive. Yet you serve. You build their machines. You process their ores. You look away when others are taken. Shame washed over Corvin, hot and unexpected. What choice did I have? He demanded. Resistance means death. You know that better than most. He gestured to the ghost's broken form. Yes, the ghost acknowledged. I chose death rather than continue building the instruments of oppression. Each has their own threshold of conscience. Another ghost approached. A young man, not much older than a boy, his neck bearing the livid marks of strangulation. I sabotaged a shipment of neural whips, he said, his mental voice carrying a note of pride despite his grisly end. 17 overseers received fatal shocks when they tried to use them. 17 small acts of justice. More ghosts gathered, each sharing their stories directly into Corvin's mind. Tales of small rebellions and major resistance operations, of secret acts of sabotage and public defiance. Some had died quickly, others had endured extended torture. All had made choices that Corvin had carefully avoided throughout his years of service. Enough, he said finally, overwhelmed by the chorus of voices and the weight of their judgment. I understand. I was a coward. I chose survival. No, said the girl, who had remained silently observing. They don't come to judge you. They come to be witnessed, to be remembered. She gestured to the assembled spirits. They were erased from records, their names stripped from the worker logs, their existence denied. In the official history of Giedi Prime, they never lived at all. Corvin looked at the gathering of ghosts with new understanding. What they sought was not judgment but acknowledgement, the simple dignity of having their lives and deaths recognized by another human being. "I see you," he said quietly, addressing the assembly. "I hear your stories. I will remember." A ripple of what might have been relief passed through the ghostly gathering. Several nodded in solemn acknowledgement before fading back into the general shimmer that filled the chamber. Others lingered, seemingly with more to communicate. The girl touched Corvin's arm gently. "There's more to see," she said. "Will you continue?" Though shaken by the encounter, Corvin nodded. The flame in his hand pulsed briefly brighter, as if responding to his decision, and the girl led him toward another tunnel branching off from the main chamber. This passage descended more steeply, the bone layer giving way to bare earth that showed signs of having been deliberately excavated. The walls here bore marks of tools, not the precision cuts of modern mining equipment, but the irregular gouges of hand implements wielded by desperate hands. "Escape tunnels," the girl explained as they walked, "dug by prisoners over decades, working with stolen utensils, bits of metal, sometimes just their bare hands. A few inches each day, the debris hidden in clothing or consumed to avoid detection." "Did any succeed?" Corvin asked, running his fingers over the rough wall surface, feeling the imprint of countless hands that had worked the earth before him. "Some," the girl acknowledged. "Though freedom on Giedi Prime is relative, most were recaptured. Others died in the attempt. A few, very few, managed to secure passage off-world." She glanced back at him. "Hope is a powerful motivator, even when the odds approach zero." The tunnel eventually opened into another chamber, smaller than the first, but somehow more oppressive. Here the walls seemed to pulse subtly, expanding and contracting like the sides of a massive organism breathing in slow, measured rhythm. "What's happening?" Corvin asked, unnerved by the movement. "The walls remember," the girl said. "Every scream, every sob, every whispered prayer, the stone absorbed them all." She placed her palm flat against the nearest wall. "Listen." Hesitantly, Corvin mimicked her action, pressing his hand to the pulsing surface. Immediately, he was engulfed in sound. Not physical noise, but psychic echoes of thousands of voices crying out in pain, rage, despair, and occasionally defiance. The emotional impact was staggering, a tidal wave of suffering that threatened to drown his consciousness. He snatched his hand away, gasping. How can you bear it?" he asked the girl, who still maintained contact with the wall, her expression serene despite the torment flowing through her. "I don't bear it," she replied. "I honor it. There's a difference." As his breathing steadied, Corvin noticed a new ghostly figure forming in the center of the chamber. Distinct from the others he had seen, more substantive somehow. This apparition took the form of a Harkonnen soldier, complete with the distinctive uniform and cruel implements of his station. But where a face should have been, there was only a void, a darkness deeper than the surrounding dimness. The girl finally removed her hand from the wall and turned to observe the manifestation. "Ah," she said softly. "He's been waiting for you specifically." "Who is he?" Corvin asked, instinctively backing away from the faceless figure. "Not who, but what," the girl corrected. "This is the collective guilt of those who served willingly, who embraced the cruelty rather than merely enduring it." The figure raised its arms in a gesture that might have been supplication or threat. As it did, its faceless head tilted downward, and with a shock, Corvin realized there was a Harkonnen mask lying on the ground at its feet, one of the ceremonial face coverings worn by elite guards during public executions. The mask was cracked across one cheek, and from its empty eye sockets, a thick fluid that resembled blood oozed slowly, forming small crimson pools on the chamber floor. "Why is it bleeding?" Corvin whispered, unable to look away from the grotesque sight. "Because guilt wounds," the girl answered simply. "Because even the most dedicated servant of cruelty eventually faces a reckoning, if not in life, then in the space between worlds." The faceless figure began to change, its form shifting to mimic Corvin's own dimensions and bearing. With growing horror, he recognized the implication. The ghost was offering a glimpse of what he might become, another faceless instrument of Harkonnen oppression, eternally bleeding guilt into the foundations of Gedi Prime. "No," Corvin said firmly, stepping forward rather than retreating further. "That's not me. I may have served out of fear, but I never embraced their cruelty. I never took pleasure in another's pain." The figure paused in its transformation, hovering in a state between Harkonnen guard and Corvin's reflection. It seemed to be waiting for something more, some deeper acknowledgement or commitment. Understanding came to Corvin suddenly. "And I never will," he added, his voice stronger. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever they do to me, I won't become that. I choose to die as myself, rather than live as a reflection of their evil." The figure bowed its head slightly, as if in acknowledgement of his declaration. Then it collapsed, not like a physical body falling, but like smoke dispersing in a strong wind, leaving only the cracked mask on the ground. The blood-like substance continued to seep from its eye sockets, but now formed a pattern on the floor. Symbols in a language Corvin didn't recognize. "What does it say?" he asked the girl. "Names," she replied. "The names of those who wore the mask, and the names of those who died beneath it." She knelt and touched the liquid, which clung to her finger like real blood. All connected, oppressor and oppressed, in a cycle as old as human cruelty and as young as tomorrow's dawn. Corvin found himself kneeling beside her, staring at the mask that represented so much suffering, both inflicted and endured. "Is this why I'm here? To understand that I'm part of this cycle?" The girl looked at him with eyes that now seemed ancient, wells of wisdom far deeper than her apparent age would suggest. "You're here because you sought escape through the spice, and the spice revealed truth. What you do with that truth is your choice. The last choice you may have." She stood, brushing dirt from her simple garment, and gestured to another passage leading away from the chamber. "There's one more thing to see, if you're willing." Though emotionally exhausted by what he had already experienced, Corvin nodded and followed her into the new tunnel. This one curved gently upward, and the oppressive atmosphere of the previous chambers gradually lightened. The walls here were different. Interspersed with the packed earth were veins of crystalline material that caught the light from his flame and reflected it in rainbow patterns. "What is this place?" Corvin asked, momentarily distracted from his grim circumstances by the unexpected beauty. "The future," the girl said enigmatically. "Or one possible future." The tunnel terminated in a small, perfectly circular chamber with a domed ceiling. Unlike the previous areas they had visited, this space was empty of bones or ghosts. The crystalline veins converged here, creating a complex lattice across the walls and ceiling that transformed the flame's light into an ever-shifting aurora of color. In the center of the chamber stood a single pedestal of the same crystalline material, atop which rested something so incongruous that Corvin initially didn't comprehend what he was seeing. A black rose, its petals as dark as space itself, yet somehow reflecting hints of deep crimson when the light struck at certain angles. "A rose?" Corvin asked incredulously. "How is this possible? Nothing grows on Giadi Prime except in the Harkonnen private gardens." "Not now," the girl agreed. "But once, before the factories, before the pollution, this world was different. And it may be again, someday." She approached the pedestal and carefully lifted the rose, cradling it as one might a priceless artifact. "The planet remembers what it was. The potential remains, buried deep, wait." She extended the rose toward Corvin. "Take it," she said. "So, we're not forgotten." Hesitantly, Corvin accepted the flower. Despite its appearance, it felt warm in his hand, vibrant with life that defied the dead world above. As his fingers closed around the stem, he noticed it bore no thorns, unusual for a rose, yet somehow appropriate for this dream gift. "What am I supposed to do with it?" he asked, genuine confusion mixing with the wonder he felt at holding something so beautiful in this place of darkness and bones. The girl smiled, and in that expression Corvin saw a flash of hope so pure it made his heart ache. "Remember," she said simply, "and be remembered." Before he could question further, the crystalline walls began to brighten, the reflected light intensifying until it was almost blinding. Corvin shielded his eyes with his free hand, still clutching the black rose in the other. When he lowered his arm, the girl was gone, and the chamber had begun to shift around him, its solid walls becoming transparent, revealing glimpses of Giadi Prime's possible futures. He saw the planet as it might have been before industrialization, rolling hills covered in vegetation, clear waters flowing in rivers that had long since been converted to toxic drainage channels. He saw it as it might be after the fall of House Harkonnen, a world slowly healing, the poisons leached from its soil by patient, deliberate effort over generations. And he saw what might be in the far distant future, a Giadi Prime transformed, its wounds not erased but incorporated into a new identity, like scars that tell the story of survival. Through all these visions, one constant remained. People remembered. Monuments stood where the factories had been, recording the names of those who had suffered and died. Children learned the planet's true history, not the sanitized version created by the victors. The bones were gathered from their scattered resting places and properly honored, their stories preserved for those who would come after. The visions faded gradually, returning Corvin to the crystal chamber with its softly glowing walls. The black rose remained in his hand, solid and real despite the dreamlike nature of his experience. As he stood contemplating it, he became aware of a subtle change in the quality of light around him, a warming, a shift toward the red end of the spectrum. The chamber began to dissolve, not in the dramatic fashion of the previous vision, but gently, like mist evaporating under morning sun. Corvin felt himself rising, the kilometers of rock and earth between him and the surface becoming insubstantial as he floated upward with increasing speed. He gasped awake on the hard bench of his cell, the harsh artificial lighting assaulting his eyes after the subtle glow of the crystal chamber. For a moment, disorientation clouded his mind. The abrupt transition from the dream depth of Giadi Prime to the stark reality of Harkonnen imprisonment left him struggling to reorient himself. The spice dream was fading already, its details blurring as his conscious mind reasserted control, but the emotional impact remained. The weight of witnessing, the responsibility of remembering, the unexpected hope contained in the black rose's potential for beauty, even in the darkest places. Corvin sat up slowly, his body protesting after hours in an uncomfortable position. As he moved, he felt something in his closed fist, something that could not be there. He opened his hand, expecting nothing. Instead, he found a small, perfectly formed black rose, exactly as it had appeared in his dream. Its petals gleamed with hints of deep red in the cell's harsh light, impossibly vibrant against the industrial grey surroundings. Corvin stared at the flower in shock and wonder. How could it be here? The spice could create vivid hallucinations, but it couldn't manifest physical objects from dreams into reality. Yet the evidence lay in his palm, undeniable and exquisite. As he gently touched one velvet petal, a memory surfaced, not from his dream, but from early childhood. Before his family had been relocated to the factory districts, his grandmother had tended a small collection of plants in their dwelling, tiny spots of green that defied the general bleakness of Giedi Prime. Among them had been a rosebush, its flowers so dark they appeared black except in direct sunlight. Black roses were native to Giedi Prime before the Harkonnens, his grandmother had told him. They grew in the valleys where the refineries now stand. The old stories say they'll bloom again when the planet is free. The memory had been buried so deeply that Corvin had forgotten it entirely until this moment. Had the spice somehow excavated it, transformed it into the vivid journey through the bones beneath the factories? Or had something more inexplicable occurred? Some genuine connection to the collective memory of Giedi Prime and its people? The cell door slid open, interrupting his contemplation. Two guards stood in the opening, neural whips ready at their belts. "Prisoner Corvin Altan, stand for processing," one ordered flatly. Corvin looked down at the rose in his hand, then back at the guards. They showed no reaction to the flower's presence. Could they not see it? Or was it so far outside their expectations that their minds simply refused to register it? Whatever the explanation, Corvin understood with sudden clarity that the rose was meant for him alone, a reminder and a promise. Carefully, he tucked it into his inner pocket, close to his heart, before standing to face whatever punishment awaited. As the guards bound his wrists and led him from the cell, Corvin's mind returned to the girl's words, "Remember and be remembered." In that moment, he made a decision, not grand or heroic by conventional standards, but significant nonetheless. He would face what came not with the numb resignation that had characterized his life until now, but with open eyes and full awareness. He would bear witness to his own end, as he had borne witness to the forgotten dead, and perhaps, in doing so, he would ensure that something of value remained after he joined the bones beneath Giedi Prime.
The corridor ahead stretched long and featureless, leading to whatever fate the Harkonnens had designed for him. Corvin walked steadily forward, the black rose a warm presence against his chest, carrying with it the weight of memory and the unexpected lightness of hope.
Rain tapped gently against the ancient glass of Castle Caladan, a rhythm as familiar to Lord Sleepy Atreides as his own heartbeat. 87 years old now, the distant cousin of the long-departed ruling line had lived his entire life to the cadence of Caladan's weather, the storm seasons, the gentle spring rains, the occasional bursts of perfect sunshine that turned the ocean the same deep green as the Atreides banner that still flew, somewhat faded, above the castle's highest tower. Thufir had never expected to become the caretaker of this ancestral home. As a boy, he had been far removed from the main branch of the family, with dozens of relatives standing between him and any significant inheritance. But time, politics, and the brutal realities of imperial power had gradually eliminated those who stood before him, and so, in his 43rd year, he had found himself summoned to the imperial court on Kaitane, where a functionary had informed him with perfect bureaucratic indifference that he was now the appointed steward of House Atreides' holdings on Caladan. Not the Duke. That title had been retired when the last true Atreides had disappeared into legend. Merely the caretaker, tasked with maintaining what remained of the once mighty house's ancestral seat, preserving it as a historical monument rather than a center of power. Thufir had accepted the role with the quiet dignity expected of even minor Atreides blood. In truth, he had been relieved. His career as a minor diplomatic functionary had never suited him, and the thought of returning to Caladan, a world he had visited only twice in his life but had always felt drawn to, was more appealing than any imperial appointment could have been. That had been over 4 decades ago. Now, Thufir's once dark hair had turned the silver right of sea foam, and his tall frame had begun to bow under the weight of years. Yet he remained vigorous for his age, walking the castle grounds daily, personally inspecting the maintenance of buildings that had stood for centuries before his birth, and would likely stand for centuries after his death. Tonight, however, a deep weariness had settled into his bones, brought on by the weather and the peculiar melancholy that often accompanied Caladan's longest autumn rains. He had retired early to his chambers, not the grand ducal suite, which he had maintained but never occupied out of a sense of propriety, but a comfortable set of rooms in the castle's eastern wing, where large windows overlooked the sea. The rain continued its gentle percussion against the glass as Thufir settled into the wide bed, its frame carved from local hardwood by craftsmen whose names had been forgotten generations ago. He had dismissed his attendants earlier than usual, preferring solitude and the company of raindrops to the well-intentioned hovering of staff. Despite his fatigue, sleep proved elusive. Thufir lay awake, listening to the rhythmic beating of the rain and the distant crash of waves against the cliffs below the castle. There was another sound too, just at the edge of hearing, a faint music that might have been the wind through the castle's ancient stonework, or perhaps just the fancy of an old man drifting toward dreams. When sleep finally came, it arrived not as the profound unconsciousness he had hoped for, but as a gradual blurring of the boundary between wakefulness and dreaming. Thufir remained aware of his body lying in bed, of the sound of rain and sea, but simultaneously found himself elsewhere, standing barefoot on the wet sand of Caladan's shore, cool mist enveloping him in its gentle embrace. The transition was so seamless that Thufir did not immediately recognize it as a dream. The sensations were too precise. The gritty texture of sand between his toes, the salt-laden air filling his lungs, the peculiar luminosity of moonlight diffused through sea mist. He was dressed in a simple robe of Atreides green, the fabric light against his skin, despite the dampness of the air. Before him stretched the vast ocean, its surface silvered by a moon he could sense rather than see through the thick mist. Behind him, he knew without looking, rose the cliffs that supported Castle Caladan, though they too were obscured by the glowing fog that surrounded him. "A fine night for memories," came a voice from nearby, startling Thufir from his contemplation of the hidden sea. He turned to find an elderly man kneeling at the edge of where sand met rocky shore, tending to a cluster of small, luminescent flowers that Thufir recognized as tide blossoms, rare phosphorescent plants that bloomed only during specific lunar phases. The old gardener's hands moved with practiced precision, clearing debris from around the delicate stems, occasionally adding what appeared to be crushed shell to the soil surrounding them. I didn't realize tide blossoms still grew on this shore, Thufir said, approaching the kneeling figure. I thought they had died out years ago. The gardener looked up, his face weathered by sun and sea winds, eyes the deep blue of a lifetime spent near spice, though such eyes were rare on Caladan. Some things persist, my lord, if they're properly tended, memory chief among them. As the man spoke, he resumed his work, humming a tune that struck Thufir as hauntingly familiar, though he could not place it. The melody seemed to blend with the rhythm of the waves, creating a counterpoint that tugged at something deep within Thufir's mind. A recollection hovering just beyond conscious reach. I know that song, Thufir said, the certainty growing, even as the specific memory remained elusive. The gardener nodded without looking up. Of course you do, my lord. Duke Leto was fond of it. Had the court musicians play it during the spring festivals. Said it reminded him of his father. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air ran through Thufir. Duke Leto had died decades before Thufir's birth. This gardener, old as he appeared, could not possibly be old enough to have known the last ruling duke of House Atreides on Caladan. Who are you? Thufir asked, suddenly certain that this was indeed a dream, despite the convincing reality of sand and salt air. The gardener smiled, the expression creating a web of wrinkles around his blue within blue eyes. Just a tender of memories, my lord, like yourself. He gestured toward the mist-shrouded water. The tide is at its turning. The voices will be clearer now, if you've a mind to listen. As if in response to the gardener's words, the mist over the water began to shift, swirling in patterns too deliberate to be natural, and within those patterns, Thufir began to distinguish sounds, distant at first, then gradually clarifying into recognizable voices. A man's laughter, deep and genuine, echoed from somewhere to his right. A woman's voice, cultured and precise, recited what sounded like a lesson in politics. A child, a boy, asked endless questions about the sea creatures visible in a tide pool. The voices overlapped, separated, combined again, in a complex auditory tapestry that should have been cacophonous, but instead achieved a strange harmony. I don't understand, Thufir said, turning in place as he tried to locate the sources of these phantom voices. The mist holds echoes, the gardener explained, rising stiffly to his feet. The tide blossoms continued to glow at his ankles, their light seeming to intensify as the voices from the fog grew stronger. Caladan remembers its true lords, even after all this time, the sea most of all. The gardener began walking along the shore, and Thufir found himself following, drawn by both curiosity and a growing sense that something significant awaited him within the mist. As they walked, the voices from the fog shifted and changed. Now Thufir heard what seemed to be soldiers singing a marching song, their voices strong and unified, occasionally breaking into laughter or good-natured argument. The Duke's personal guard, the gardener commented, returning from the campaign against the pirates of the Eastern Archipelago. A great victory that was. The people lined the harbor when the ships returned. They passed through that cluster of voices, and another formed around them. The sounds of a formal banquet, crystal glasses clinking, diplomatic conversation conducted in multiple languages, the subtle music of an era long past. The reception for the Akazi ambassador, the gardener said, his tone nostalgic. The beginning of the alliance that would serve both houses well for 3 generations. Lady Atreides wore sea pearls in her hair, and all agreed she outshone the famed Akazi jewels. Again and again as they walked the misty shore, Thufir found himself immersed in moments of Atreides history, some grand and consequential, others intimate and personal. A heated council debate over water conservation policies, Lady Jessica teaching young Paul the fundamental principles of Bene Gesserit breathing techniques, Duke Leto's voice, strong and assured, swearing the oath of fealty to the Emperor while privately expressing concerns to his mentat about Harkonnen influence at court. "These are not my memories," Thufir said at last, as they paused near a formation of rocks that jutted from the sand like dark islands in the luminous fog. "I was born long after these events, and yet you feel them," the gardener observed. "They reside in you, as they reside in these waters, these stones, this very air. Blood remembers, Lord Atreides, even when diluted by generations." Thufir started to object to the title. He was not Lord Atreides, merely a caretaker with distant connection to the bloodline. But the words died in his throat as the mist before them parted to reveal a large tide pool nestled among the rocks. Its surface was mirror still, despite the nearby crashing of waves, and it seemed to glow from within, as if the tide blossoms had cousins that bloomed beneath the water. "Look," the gardener said simply, gesturing to the pool. Thufir approached hesitantly and gazed into the illuminated water. Instead of seeing his own reflection, he found himself looking at a scene from a time long before his birth. A young Duke Leto stood at the prow of a ship, his face turned toward the distant shore of Caladan, expression set in lines of determination and love. Behind him on the vessel, servants and guards prepared for landing, while messengers waited with news to be delivered the moment they docked. The scene shifted, ripples passing across the pool's surface to reveal new images. Paul Atreides as a young boy, practicing knife work with Duncan Idaho on the castle's training grounds. Jessica in the castle gardens, pausing in her walk to close her eyes and turn her face to the sun. Gurney Halleck singing to a rapt audience of castle staff, his balisette cradled in scarred hands. With each new vision, Thufir felt a tightening in his chest. Not pain, but a profound emotion that defied simple categorization. It was longing and pride, grief and joy, a complex reaction to witnessing the intimate moments of a family he had never known, but whose legacy he had devoted his life to preserving. "Why am I seeing this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The gardener had moved to stand beside him at the pool's edge. "Because you needed to remember what you never knew. Because a caretaker's task is not merely to maintain stone and wood, but to preserve the spirit that gave those materials meaning." As he spoke, new figures began to emerge from the mist along the shoreline, men and women dressed in the formal attire of House Atreides from various eras. They walked with purpose toward the water's edge, some nodding respectfully to Thufir as they passed, others focused entirely on their destination. To Thufir's amazement, they continued walking directly into the sea, their forms remaining solid even as the waves should have engulfed them. They did not sink, but seemed to merge with the foam and spray, becoming one with the ocean itself. "The answer the seas call," the gardener explained, "as all Atreides eventually do. The ocean of Caladan has been their constant companion from the house's founding to its ending. In return, it keeps their voices, their memories, their essence." Thufir watched the procession of ghosts, for he now accepted that was what they must be, with a combination of awe and melancholy. Among them, he recognized figures from the historical records he had studied so carefully since assuming his role. Paulus Atreides, the old duke, his bearing regal despite his advanced years. Dominic Atreides, who had reformed Caladan's educational system. Elena Atreides, whose diplomatic skills had averted war with neighboring systems 3 times during her regency. "There are so many," Thufir murmured. "I knew the house had a long history here, but to see them like this. And yet these are but a fraction," the gardener said. Most have already completed their journey into the deep, where individual memory joins the collective waters of history. He pointed to a particularly clear area of mist where a new figure had appeared. But some maintain their distinction longer than others. The figure that approached them now was a woman, tall and graceful despite her obvious age, wrapped in a long cloak that concealed much of her form. She moved with purpose across the sand, and, as she drew nearer, Thufir caught a glimpse of her face beneath the cloak's hood. Striking features, proud and beautiful even in elderhood, and eyes of the deepest blue, marking her as a Bene Gesserit of high rank. "Lady Jessica?" Thufir breathed, recognition immediate despite having seen her only in centuries-old images preserved in the castle archives. The woman paused at the tide line, turning to face the shore rather than the sea. Her gaze seemed to find Thufir across the distance, and she inclined her head in what might have been acknowledgement or approval. Then she raised one hand in a simple gesture that somehow conveyed both greeting and farewell. "She doesn't join the others in the sea?" Thufir asked the gardener. "Not yet," the old man replied. "She waits for someone, as she has waited for a very long time." As if summoned by these words, the mist parted once more, revealing a solitary figure standing on a rocky outcropping some distance down the shore. Even from afar, there was something commanding about the silhouette, a sense of contained power and presence that made Thufir's breath catch in his throat. "Is that—" he began, but could not complete the question. The gardener smiled. "Some questions are better left unasked, my lord. Some legends better left in mist." He turned his attention back to the tide pool, where the images had shifted again, now showing scenes from Thufir's own life. His arrival at Castle Caladan as its newly appointed steward, his careful restoration of the ducal library, his quiet persistence in maintaining Atreides traditions even as the house's political significance faded from the Imperium's memory. "I've done so little compared to them," Thufir said, watching his own life reflected in the glowing waters. "Maintained what was left, nothing more." "Is that so little?" the gardener asked. "To keep faith when all reason for faith seems lost. To honor oaths never personally sworn but inherited through blood. To preserve not just stone and wood, but meaning and memory." He shook his head. "No, Lord Atreides. Your service has been worthy of your name." Before Thufir could respond, a new sound emerged from the mist. A melody played on what he recognized as a baliset, though with a mastery rarely heard in modern times. The tune was the same one the gardener had been humming earlier, but now fully realized, its complex harmonies evoking both melancholy and hope. "Gurney Halleck's arrangement," the gardener said, his voice soft with reverence. "Duke Leto's favorite. They say he requested it be played during the final feast on Caladan, before the house departed for Arrakis." As the music swelled, carried on the mist as if the player were both everywhere and nowhere, Thufir felt a profound shift in the atmosphere around them. The luminosity of the fog intensified, the tide blossoms glowed more brightly, and the voices from the mist grew clearer, no longer fragmented whispers but fully formed conversations, laughter, songs, and declaration. And then, as if a barrier had dissolved, Thufir realized he recognized these voices. Not from historical records or second-hand accounts, but from some deeper place within himself, as if memories locked in his bloodline had suddenly been made accessible to his conscious mind. The gardener watched him with knowing eyes. "You hear them truly now," he said, "the voices of your ancestors." "How is this possible?" Thufir asked, overwhelmed by the sudden intimacy of connection to people long dead, yet suddenly, vividly present. The veil between past and present thins on certain nights, the gardener explained, when the moons align just so, when the tide reaches its highest point, when someone with the blood is open to hearing. He gestured to the now brilliantly glowing tide blossoms, and when the flowers bloom, marking the path between then and now. As if responding to his words, the mist began to coalesce into more substantial forms. Not just voices now, but translucent apparitions that moved along the shore, engaged in the activities of their former lives. A group of children played an intricate game involving shells and small stone markers. Guards in Atreides uniforms stood at practiced ease, conversing quietly during their watch. A falconer released a hunting bird that soared into the mist before disappearing from view. Might seem so real, Thufir said, resisting the urge to approach these phantoms, knowing instinctively that to do so might dispel the delicate magic that allowed him to perceive them. Memory properly honored is as real as the present moment, the gardener replied, less substantial to the touch perhaps, but often more enduring in significance. The music from the unseen balisette shifted to a new melody, this one martial in character. A House Atreides battle hymn, Thufir realized, ancient even in Duke Leto's time. In response, the ghostly figures on the beach stood straighter, some placing their hands over their hearts in the traditional salute of fealty. From somewhere deep in the mist came a voice that silenced all others with its quiet authority. We are Atreides. What we do here echoes across the stars and through time itself. Duke Leto's voice Thufir knew with certainty, though the Duke himself remained unseen within the fog. The assembled ghosts bowed their heads in acknowledgement of their lord's words, the gesture rippling down the shore like a wave. That was their strength, the gardener said, watching the spirits with something like paternal pride. Not their wealth or military might or political influence, though they possessed all these. Their true power lay in understanding that actions have consequences far beyond the moment. That honor is not an abstract concept, but a living practice with real effects. A lesson forgotten in much of the Imperium, Thufir observed, thinking of the endless political machinations he had witnessed during his years in Imperial service. The casual cruelty and self-interest that characterized so many of the great houses. Forgotten, yes, the gardener agreed, but not lost. He turned to face Thufir directly. That is why the caretakers matter, why you matter, Lord Atreides. You keep alive what others would allow to fade. Before Thufir could respond, the mist shifted dramatically, swirling in a sudden vortex that momentarily obscured his vision. When it cleared, the beach was transformed. The ghosts were gone, the music silenced. Even the gardener had vanished, though the tide blossoms remained, their glow now the primary source of illumination along the darkened shore. Alone, Thufir felt a momentary panic, a sense of abandonment that cut deeper than he would have expected. But as he turned in place, seeking any sign of his guide or the phantoms that had populated the beach, he became aware of a new presence, a figure standing at the edge of the now calm sea, face turned toward the horizon, as if waiting. Drawn by a compulsion he couldn't name, Thufir approached this solitary form. As he drew closer, he realized it was a young man, perhaps in his early 20s, dressed in a simple Atreides uniform without rank insignia. There was something hauntingly familiar about his profile, about the way he held himself with quiet confidence. The young man turned as Thufir neared, revealing a face that combined features from many of the apparitions Thufir had glimpsed in the mist. The strong jaw of Duke Leto, the penetrating gaze that recalled Lady Jessica, and other, older traits that spoke of Atreides' generations long past. "Who are you?" Thufir asked, though part of him already knew the answer, impossible as it seemed. The young man's smile was both gentle and sad. "I am what might have been," he said, his voice carrying the same quiet authority Thufir had heard in the mist. "And what may yet be, in a future beyond your time." "I don't understand," Thufir said, though the growing ache in his chest suggested some part of him did indeed comprehend what this apparition represented. "House Atreides fell from power," the young man said, stating it as simple fact rather than tragedy. "But it did not end. The bloodline continues scattered across the stars, diluted, hidden, often unaware of its own heritage, but alive." His gaze, intense beyond his apparent years, fixed on Thufir. "As you have proven by your very existence, by your return to Caladan, by the call you felt to preserve what remained." The implications were staggering. Thufir had always known he was distantly related to the main Atreides line, but had assumed, as had the Imperium, that the direct lineage had been extinguished, that perhaps some distant cousins like himself remained, carrying a drop or two of the blood but none of the power or significance of the true house. "There are others?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Always," the young man confirmed. "The desert could not claim all. The bloodline endures, waiting for the time when it will resurface." He glanced back toward the sea, as if hearing a call imperceptible to Thufir. "I've remained too long. The tide turns, and I must go." "Wait," Thufir said, reaching out instinctively. "Tell me more. How can I find them? How can I help restore what was lost?" The young man's expression softened. "Your task is not to restore, but to remember. To preserve what remains on Caladan. To keep the old ways alive. To maintain the records and traditions." He gestured toward the distant cliffs where Castle Caladan stood. "You are the anchor that holds the past in place, so that when the future finally arrives, it will have something solid to build upon." With those words, he turned and began walking into the sea. Unlike the earlier procession of ghosts who had merged with the foam and spray, this figure remained solid as the water rose around him. First to his knees, then his waist, finally his shoulders. Just before his head would have submerged, he paused and looked back at Thufir one last time. "Remember," he said, the word both command and blessing. Then he continued forward, disappearing beneath the waves without a splash or ripple to mark his passing. Thufir stood at the water's edge for what felt like hours, watching the spot where the young man had vanished, half expecting him to resurface. But the sea remained calm, its surface occasionally illuminated by moonlight breaking through the thinning mist. The voices that had filled the shore earlier were gone now, replaced by the natural sounds of waves and wind. Eventually, Thufir became aware of another presence beside him. Not the gardener returned, but the cloaked figure he had recognized as Lady Jessica. She stood silently, her gaze fixed on the same point in the sea that held Thufir's attention. "Did you see him?" Thufir asked without looking at her, uncertain whether this apparition could or would respond. "Always," she replied, her voice rich with emotions too complex for Thufir to fully decipher. "Though never for long enough." They stood together in companionable silence as the mist continued to dissipate, revealing more of the moonlit sea and sky. The tide had begun to recede, leaving glittering trails on the wet sand. "What happens now?" Thufir asked finally. Lady Jessica turned to him, her aged face serene beneath the cloak's hood. "You wake," she said simply. "You continue. You remember." She reached out one hand, a gesture similar to the one she had made from a distance earlier, but now directed specifically at him. Her fingers, though transparent as mist, lightly touched his cheek in what felt like a benediction. "And know that you are not alone in your vigil, Lord Atreides. Caladan remembers its own." Before Thufir could respond, her form began to dissolve, becoming indistinguishable from the surrounding mist. As she faded, so too did the beach, the sea, the glowing tide blossoms, all gradually replaced by the familiar contours of his bedchamber in Castle Caladan, illuminated by the first pale light of dawn breaking through the rain clouds. Thufir opened his eyes to find himself in his bed, the rain having stopped sometime during the night. The windows revealed a sky transitioning from the deep blue of late night to the pearl grey of early morning. He lay still, allowing the vivid impressions of his dream to settle in his memory, refusing to let them fade as dreams typically do upon waking. When he finally rose and approached the window, he was unsurprised to see that the mist from his dream was real, a thick white blanket covering the shoreline below the castle cliffs. Such mists were common after long autumn rains, but this one seemed particularly dense and extensive, reaching far out over the water. As he watched, Thufir became aware of a sound rising from the direction of the beach, faint but unmistakable. A melody played on a baliset, the same tune he had heard in his dream, Duke Leto's favorite. It drifted through the morning air for just a moment before fading away, like a memory slipping back into the past. Thufir smiled, a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying lifting from his shoulders. He was not merely a caretaker of stones and records, but a guardian of something far more precious. The living memory of House Atreides, preserved not just in archives and traditions, but in the very air and water of Caladan itself, and somewhere scattered across the stars in bloodlines thought lost or insignificant. The descendants of that great house continued, unaware of their heritage, but perhaps feeling the same inexplicable pull that had drawn Thufir back to this shore, waiting for the time when the tide of history would turn once more, bringing what was submerged back to the surface. For now, though, his duty remained here, in this ancient castle by the sea. Thufir dressed with particular care, selecting formal attire he normally reserved for ceremonial occasions. Today he would visit the ducal crypt, long sealed but maintained as part of his responsibility. He would bring fresh flowers and spend time among the stone effigies of those who had come before, not as a mere ritual of preservation, but as an act of communion with the voices he now knew still lingered in Caladan's mists. As he prepared to leave his chambers, Thufir paused at the window for one last look at the shore. The mist was beginning to burn away in the strengthening sunlight, revealing the beach below. For just a moment, he thought he glimpsed figures moving along the waterline, an elderly gardener kneeling among rocks where no plants grew, a cloaked woman watching from the cliffs, a young man standing at the edge of the receding tide. Then, the angle of light changed, and there was only empty beach, wet sand reflecting the morning sun, and the eternal sea that held the memories of all who had ever called Caladan home. Thufir touched his fingers to the ancient glass, a gesture of acknowledgement to what he had seen and what remained hidden. "We are Atreides," he whispered, the words both pledge and prayer. "What we do here echoes across the stars and through time itself." From somewhere deep within the castle, a bell began to toll, marking the hour. Thufir straightened his formal jacket, squared his shoulders and turned away from the window. The day beckoned, with all its duties and responsibilities. And now, for the first time in decades, those duties felt not like obligations to the past, but connections to a future he would not live to see, but had a hand in ensuring would arrive. As he walked through the ancient corridors of Castle Caladan, Thufir could have sworn he heard the faint echo of Duke Leto's laughter, Paul's questioning voice, Jessica's measured tones. Not as haunting remnants of what was lost, but as welcome companions on a journey that spanned generations. The voices from the mist had followed him home, not to disturb his peace, but to enrich it with their enduring presence. Outside, the last of the mist dissolved in the growing warmth of the day, but its essence remained. In memory, in blood, in the quiet determination of an aging lord to honor what had been and preserve it for what was yet to come. Our journey through the sands of Arrakis comes to a close. Now, you will hear the gentle crackling of fire and ambient sounds to accompany your sleep. These calming sounds will continue without interruption, creating a peaceful atmosphere as you drift deeper into rest. May the waters of your dreams flow freely tonight, and may you find the same peace that comes to those who wander the desert under Arrakis's twin moons. Sleep well, traveler, and may your mind find sanctuary in the stillness of the night. Good night, and dream of spice-scented winds carrying you to peaceful shores.